welcome to another edition of Revivalcast. We are on to episode 35 now, so we have made it pretty far. I'm pretty excited. We have a brand new guest today that you guys can see there. Polaris is hanging out with us today to talk about Revival and all the many topics that we have missed in last week's show that we missed. So we've got plenty to talk about. We do not have Sail Kite. We're not sure where he is. I've put the dead skull up. He's currently missing right now, but we will move on as planned. And yeah, we're pretty excited for today's show. So first of all, of course, I'm going to let Polaris introduce herself, and we'll get to know her a little bit, and then we'll move on and start digging into today's big topics. And of course, myself and Diggs, you guys are familiar with. So yeah, go ahead, Polaris. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Just like a quick intro, if you want.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm a gamer. That's pretty much the relevant thing for what we're doing here. I don't really remember. It's crossed my mind several times to wonder how the heck I even found Revival. I'm going to guess that it was a link from MMORPG.com. But to be honest, I don't remember.
What kind of games do you typically play? Do you focus on MMORPGs? Do you play FPSs? Are there other types of games that you also enjoy? Single-player games too?
I don't do single player anymore. I had this kind of odd experience playing Oblivion, where I discovered all these totally cool things, and I had no way and nobody to show them what I found. And it's like, okay, this part sucks. This just isn't going to work for me anymore. And so I'd played MMOs before that, but I have not played any single player games since then.
Valix was just saying that I think today somebody popped in a new game and they were saying, yeah, single player, I don't care.
Yeah, that's pretty much... multiplayer is really my thing. I do enjoy single player games, but I generally don't give games a super close look if they're single player unless I'm in the mood for a single player game, which is, it happens, but it's not something I go hunting for all the time. But yeah, totally. That's I did say that today. Definitely my mood right now.
And are you typically playing fantasy, science fiction games? For me, horror is new. I have not really been into horror before. A couple of decades ago almost now, I had friends who were playing Paranoia and Call of Cthulhu, and I just didn't get it because, the best that you can hope for in those games is that your character doesn't die but will still go insane anyway, and I just couldn't handle that negativity happening to my character. But it's not bothering me with Revival. I'm actually looking forward to that. So is this an unusual genre for you, or?
Yes. This is, apart from The Secret World, I have not played any horror or done anything with horror anywhere at all, ever. This is just, But, and there's so many, I ditzed around on the forums and everything, and it's like, God, I really like the way these devs communicate. I love the way they write, the things that they write about. They're so freaking passionate, and smart and intelligence, and it just comes through in everything that they post. But the horror? I mean, really? Must we do horror? And ultimately, you know how that goes. I'm here just like everybody else.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as both you guys, because horror, I mean, other than covering H1Z1 for when I've been covering Daybreak Games last year, that was really my first foray into like a true horror type game setting. It was a zombie apocalypse, or Revival, obviously completely different with like true old school style horror. So it's not something I'm generally into, but like Polaris has mentioned a little bit, I mean, the passion of the devs and what the game is kind of shaping up to be about, and the energy that's there, and the systems designs that's going on is what's drawing me in, and opening my mind to the idea of like, okay, let's try some horror. Not something I would typically engage in, but that's usually because I find a lot of horror really poorly done, especially like modern horror. So zombie tropes and dumb shambling zombies. I've never been a fan of that. I think I've mentioned it before. I enjoyed like I Am Legend, the movie type zombies, where they're just insane, insanely strong, fast, and you actually have to be afraid of those zombies. Whereas like the shambling dead ones, like if any like normal intelligence person was in that situation, it would probably be pretty easy to survive. It's just not really well written in most cases. So, but yeah, I'm excited. I discovered Lovecraft's work here. I'm not sure, Polaris, if you've read any of Lovecraft's stuff yet. If you've explored it a little bit now that you're like kind of getting into Revival, have you taken a look at any of that?
Yeah, I think I've read just about everything that was written, I think. And on the whole, I think it would be fair to say that I'm probably not a fan of Lovecraft, because the fear of the unknown thing, is kind of a trope with his writing. So you can expect the fear of the unknown to show up in almost every story that he writes, of every kind. On the other hand, working with the various ways things can happen is fine. I think that's great. I love exploring what the mind can do. So I like that part of it. I think the madness, because you're dealing with the incomprehensible, is fine. It's just, there's something about Lovecraft's writing that is actually kind of, dated, I guess. To me, I can hear that this is written from some time ago, and that doesn't even include, the
Misogyny.
racist kind of stuff in there, Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on some points about the writing there, and I too, it's curious to me about the fear of the unknown, because I think, as an explorer mindset in a lot of games I play, I actually enjoy discovering the unknown. Like, it's interesting to me more than I would say something I would fear. So, even when dealing with horror and stuff, I think in most situations, the majority of people aren't engaged in any, like, real horror, so there isn't really a lot of fear associated even with horror things a lot. So it just depends on how they're done, obviously. I guess if I would say anything like horror stuff really, gets me is when it's done where it's, describing or based on real life events, and it's actually, pretty creepy what, some human beings could do or have done, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, things like that, Manson, things like those. Those actually kind of get me on edge a little bit, but other than that, like typical fantasy horror doesn't usually make me fearful. It's usually just interesting stuff. So I totally agree with you there on Lovecraft's, like, putting that stamp on there, like, afraid of this. But it, it's not terrible. So.
Yeah, I think I really agree with you on the whole tropey thing of it, but I like the exploration potential, and so the devs have been very straightforward from the beginning about how life is ordinary. It's medieval, it's difficult, it's ordinary though. It's grounded in whatever is today's ordinariness. And then you have shit happening. And that is where I expect, and you know how tricky that is, but that's where I expect the ineffable and the mysterious to occur. And I don't know that any of those will actually scare me as a player, but I can see where they might scare my character. And what I'm hoping for is that engagement with me as a player will occur more often even, or as often as engagement with horror to the character.
I think one of the things I'm hoping to see too, we had a thread in the forums, I think the week before last, asking about if someone could use, if a weather mage could use weather magic to push their sailboat faster. And I'm thinking, I don't think you want to use the weather to push your sail. I mean, because if it was fantasy, you could do that, and that would just be cool, powerful fantasy magic. But in a horror setting, like Lovecraftian horror, I expect that to, really muck with the weather systems. That's going to cause storms. It might cause aether storms, typhoons, just because you wanted to push your one little boat a little bit faster. I think the repercussions of mucking with magic is going to be much larger than we're expecting. I mean, that's the kind of Lovecraftian edge, is that, dabbling in this stuff is not, we are not the masters of our domain. Humans aren't the masters of everything and will never be. And so that's part of the horror is, I just wanted to push my boat, but I caused a typhoon and my whole family died, Um, that's part of the horror. I think, I hope.
Yeah,
I would agree.
So, Polaris, just to get to know you a little bit more, what about Revival are you particularly looking forward to as far as things that you currently see in its design, or I know you mentioned you really like the passion of the devs and how they're communicating their ideas. Are there any specific systems or game elements that really intrigue you? I know you said horror is kind of new for you, so is that a part of it that's playing in, or is that not one of the main things that's interesting you?
No, it's not one of the things that interests me, actually. It's more the systems. The tag system is incredibly elegant and simple, and because of that, I just love it. It has so much potential in every direction. And we talk about the ripple effect of moving. I just wanted to move my boat. And the ripple effect of some small effort somewhere can have huge repercussions down the road from tags that we can't see or know particularly completely. And that, to me, is just lovely. In terms of game-playing systems, I love that you role-play by playing the game. That's a classic for me. I do not need to pretend to be anything else or do anything else. I can simply play the game, and I am immersed, and therefore it is role-playing by definition. And then I am a fan of actually strategy games. So Bridge, Go. I actually never got too far into chess because I didn't have a good teacher. But StarCraft, some simple game like Transport Tycoon, those kinds of games that you have to actually plan and you have to see things through to the end. Those kinds of things I love, and they are absolutely built into Revival. Whether it's economic or PvP even or any of that.
What occupations or skills are you thinking about?
Well, I think my primary fascination early on was with planeswalking, and the question that arose from that, of course, is how do you make it pay? So that requires then the inclusion of those other systems to how are we going to make this work? How are you going to make this pay? So that's where then the economic play comes in, and the whole figuring things out, and then once I do that, it's like, well, that could work over there, but then that will really take me far away from this thing over here, and I need to pull a digs and roll a 5th or 6th or 25th all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm finding that, Revival's design is really interesting because I think players are going to be forced to make choices extremely often. You run in your typical MMORPG and you're, occasionally presented with an impactful choice. And now, just based on the system's design in general, players are going to constantly be weighing, what's more value, whereas in an MMORPG, the only value you're weighing is maybe gear, and usually that's straightforwardly decided for you. It's just, hey, this has better stats, you equip it. And there's no design choices. You're kind of just maybe exploring the world in your own way if the, level scaling or balancing is done in such a way that you can go to a different place to level than one specific area, but there's not any decision making. And I mean, that in Revival, it's like, okay, well, what skill do I want to pursue first? Can I pursue multiples at a time? Do I just play out my character and see what skills they develop as they just, play their life? There's so many different ways you can do it, and I think no matter if you're going to be playing it for roleplay or just to play the game elements of it, that you're going to have to make, consequential choices. Like this, I'm obviously missing out on this to do this, and that's a choice that you're having to make. So it's really interesting. I think that element of it intrigues me just as much as it does you.
Yeah, I was originally thinking that Revival was pushing me to play a little bit differently than normal because I'm normally an explorer first. And with Revival, I was thinking I would primarily stay within Crown's Rock because there's so many, well, we can jump into that next, I guess, so many political things that I want to get into in Crown's Rock that I kind of want to be centered there. And since we're not pushed to leave really in terms of leveling our character and having to go to a area that is of a higher level, you could ostensibly play most of the game in Crown's Rock. But I also want to be exploring the plains, so my exploration is actually going to be exploring other planes versus exploring other geography in the Prime Plane, which is kind of interesting. So I'm still going to be exploring, it's just in a different fashion than I'm used to.
Definitely. I've got just one last question I want to hit before we actually move into discussing developer blogs. But what are you enjoying most, or what stands out to you the most about the Revival community so far, Polaris?
Oh God, passion. Everybody is so passionate. I mean, everybody's into it one way or another, or they love it, they hate it, they want this thing, they want that thing. It doesn't really matter. It has something where it's just provoked this terrific kind of, oh my God, I'm on board thing from people who actually take more than 5 minutes and read something on the forums. And yeah, it's just remarkable in that sense, the way it's magnetizing people. I love it.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally agree.
Well, and the other thing, I mean, the biggest thing that we have with this community is the devs interaction, whether that's in IRC or whether that's in the forums. Someone was mentioning the other day that there was a newbie coming into the forums. I think they were wanting to know what we can actually do, and I gave them a list of the Day in the Life of blogs, and they said, yeah, I read those, but I wasn't sure, I remember coming in February and thinking there's so much information in the forums, like it's going to take me forever to read all this stuff, and now we're 10 months later? I can't imagine coming into the forums at this time and trying to get a hold of all the information that we've got. I think we're going to get into hopefully one of the threads later today, the lockpicking thread that had 6 times 6 questions that all got answered. 36 questions got answered by Snipe Hunter. It's amazing.
Yeah, it definitely, that's on the plan later today. We're going to talk about that just because so many questions were answered, and I thought it was a great example of, how the developers answer questions and how, people in the forums can ask questions. So we'll be talking about that a bit later because it also plays into, some of the skill advancements and the different type of progression people are going to be having in Revival. So, but we'll get into that later. First of all, we want to hit on the blogs that, which a couple weeks ago we'll hit first. We have the blog 57, which was day in the life of a politician. Pretty interesting. I first off, I'll just throw out my immediate reactions, then we'll go round robin for the both of you. I It's a blog that I was really looking forward to because, we've talked about it a lot of times before on this show, especially Diggs and myself, for non-combat related ways people can explore the game. And it's weird. Like in Revival, it's almost like commonplace now to see a mechanic that has nothing to do with combat, and it's just normal now. But for people that may not be familiar with it or just familiar with really traditional models of MMORPGs, having a non-combat system that can actually greatly influence the world and influence factions and other larger entities in the world. That's typically only been done through combat in most MMORPGs. You beat up on their guys enough, and your faction changes, or maybe you're able to actually manipulate how big their faction is or how influential they are. Usually, you aren't even able to do that, but in Revival, there are going to be a lot of ways to do that, and I think politics is one actually really powerful way people are going to be able to influence the world. And I know, every little system will have its element of influence and agency involved. But I think politics are kind of one of those meta things where, just like combat, you're, taking a huge group of people to go, assault this wilderness location where, maybe some spirit has taken residence, and it actually changes something massive in the world through the tagging system. You get rid of an evil spirit that maybe has plagued the whole area, and suddenly that opens up a lot of things. But politically, I think it's a big thing that's going to influence character, like not just the world, but people are generally going to be inhabiting populated areas. People are going to go out and explore the world, obviously. But unlike typical MMORPGs, you're not safe out in your adventuring areas. Like Revival is actually going to be pretty dangerous. And there will be a lot of time spent preparing, getting things ready. So you're going to be in populated areas a lot. So I actually think politics are going to be extremely influential on player experience, because I think we're going to spend a lot more time in city environments than we generally have in other games. So the politics that affect those is going to be pretty big. So it's really interesting because, one of the main things about politics is, for the most part, you generally get in on politics through owning some piece of property, which there will be ways to acquire those things. Right now that's buying in as a founder, but it's going to be interesting to see, because I don't know, for me personally, weighing the free to play versus the pay to play experience, it's really intriguing to me to see them designing the system in such a way that those who contribute to the game, to the game's sustainment and longevity, actually may have the most influence, especially over all players' experiences. I just thought that really stood out to me, and that wasn't something that was specifically in there. It's just something with politics in general, and I felt like the character in the sorry, this is a long rant, but the character in the blog, he was not even into politics, but just by being successful in the thing and seeing how much it influenced him and the people around him, it instantly, he's like, hey, maybe I can make a bigger impact doing this than my own little business. So he immediately just drops his job basically and starts taking on the role of a politician. So that is what stood out to me and kind of sparked all these other thoughts that I've ranted about. But yeah, I'll go ahead and pass off.
Well, I'm going to jump in real quick. Ombwa says in chat, I can see some players just staying in towns and being villains. Politics, innkeepers. I'm not sure if that's a separate thought or if he's saying that villains are, that politicians and innkeepers are villains. One of the interesting things about the way you set this up, Val, is that Jerem, the character that we have in this blog, is basically a trader. He's going between Fall Creek and I think Tide's End, and he just needs to get there safely and quickly. And I guess by safely, I mean that at first he wants to get there quickly, so he gets a horse, and then he needs somewhere where to stable the horse because the danger here is that the horse could be stolen. And it costs too much to have it kept at the caravan house. It would be easier if he had a personal stable. So that's what he starts lobbying to have built in his hometown, which I think is too small. Well, had been too small, or so small that one had not been built yet. But in this case, the interesting thing here is that in other games, it might be that we would have a faction of bandits that would be stealing people's horses, and we might have a quest to go and kill everybody in that faction, and that would stop them from stealing the horse. Where in this case, what we want to happen is use the political system to uh, keep to have a building built where you can keep that horse safe, which is very different than what we're used to.
Definitely. What were your thoughts, Polaris? Any takeaways you got? Anything that stood out to you about the blog, or any thoughts you have on the political system?
Well, I think most of mine kind of followed yours, Velix, with the whole simplicity of, I simply want this to happen. I need a stable. It needs to get going. I don't know how to do it, but they tell me if I do this, then that could happen. Oh, that worked pretty well. Let me try this thing over here. And it's just kind of a very granular, organic, earthy method of immersing yourself into what you do. And that is like life. That is immersive as players. You know, it's like, I want to see what happens next, which is the most immersive thing of all. So that I don't really have any interest in manipulating and wielding a lot of power and the whole chessboard thing when it comes to politics. But the granular aspect of it happening very organically is really appealing.
Yeah, that's.
I have no idea what I would do with that, but it's appealing.
That's a good point. Like players that even don't have any, don't want to pursue politics in any way whatsoever. Maybe leaning on the political system in small ways, like trying to get a stable built in their local community and other small things. So I think, which kind of harkens back to bigger discussions we've had in the past on, the interactivity of small systems or just systems in general, some large, some small in Revival, where instead of systems being kind of separate pieces, all of these things are going to affect each other. So I really like that element of Revival's design, which I think we've said plenty of times, but it's interesting because you can pretty much go and look at any blog, and the political blog of this past week is, an example of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll have to see how easily we're nudged into politics, kind of in the same way that we're nudged into PvP combat, potentially. In that, I mean, a lot of games I love to, in D&D after 3.0 especially, I love to max out my charisma and use charisma to bypass physical combat. And I can see how in Revival, what we might end up doing is getting into politics because we want to lower taxes in our area, or the prices of whatever resources we're using to craft with seem too high, and we want to influence those prices to go down. Or maybe it's the opposite. We need to go in and try and get some prices raised if they're rare. We'll just have to see what kind of pushes us to try and influence other people to change the way society is structured, to make our path easier. Whether that's trying to sneak some magic into Sky Pass or more magic into Crown's Rock. We'll just have to see what the politics actually are.
Yeah, and I didn't really see it as a nudge. so much as a player, I want this to happen, whatever this is, XYZ. And
Yeah, I meant
well,
from the
crap, I
game
can't do
designer.
it.
Yeah, I meant from the game designer standpoint of how they might nudge us into politics. For those of
Right.
us who think we want nothing to do with politics, or storytellers, these prices are too high, and normally I wouldn't want to go into politics, but I want those prices to come down, so I'm going to go ahead and lobby for them to come down.
Right. Well, or I want XYZ to happen, whatever that is, and
Yeah.
in any other game, there's a stopper. There's something that prevents me from being able to do that. And in Revival, there's nothing that prevents me. I have to get creative. I have to extrapolate. I have to think outside whatever box my mind is in. But that's on me. That's not on the devs. And that's amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think even too, it's almost not even that other games have something in the way, but other games like don't even provide any way to change some of these. It's just that's just the way they are, and that's how it stays. Or even worse, you get a snowball effect, like auction house prices or something like that, and it just gets out of control, and there's no way for the devs to do anything about it unless they actually step in and make some type of, you know, change where it actually, ends up pissing a lot of people off that were doing well. And I think it's interesting because now, you even avoid that situation. Like, if you have this market situation where people are like, this is stupid, and everybody kind of votes, and there's some law enacted, and now, like, it affects the play. Like, the players can't get mad at that. It's not like some arbitrary power came and made that happen. It's like the whole community, like in a, like a real life situation. Everybody else was like, hey, we don't like that. You can't do it, and they just have to live with it. So it doesn't feel like one person came and stomped on your sandbox. It's you're having to adjust to the way everybody else in the world around you is wanting to play the game, which I think gives a better. I mean, whether it's negative for a player or not, I think the latter scenario of the way Revival's trying to do it will just feel a little bit better because it feels more like real life, and also too, you realize a whole lot of people maybe didn't like the thing that you were doing that negatively affected them, whereas it doesn't just feel like one developer just comes down and brings the hammer on you. So pretty interesting aspect of that. But yeah, so I mean, politics I think are like one huge example of like the spheres of influence that players are going to have on each other and on the world around them. I think more than anything, one thing that makes Revival pretty unique as far as upcoming games out there is just the amount of agency that's going to exist in the game, which has its pros and cons, of course. But I think it's interesting to see that, for one, there will be a lot of real agency, and for two, there will be so many ways to go about it. Maybe you leverage what you want through physical prowess, through your combat skills. Maybe do it through politics, through trade. I mean, it's kind of interesting that this politician also is a trader in the beginning. He's participating in trade. I think trade will probably have a huge influence on the world as well, because whole cities can rise and fall based on the supply and demand of goods that they have, and huge trading guilds could essentially not choose not to trade with NPCs or players in a certain city to help bring about its downfall, or cripple it to where maybe some offensive some raid of the city or something. There's so many ways these systems can interact, but trade could be super influential in weakening something, and then you can have an actual combat assault on a weakened target that they didn't have their supplies, their soldiers aren't as well outfitted now, they don't have as much food to survive, so they're dealing with other things affecting their well-being, besides just having to deal with a war. So really interesting things that I think will kind of develop as, obviously, the world will start out a certain way to kind of get players, I think, involved, but eventually it's just going to kind of take its own shape and form, and the developers will make adjustments and the storytelling team will guide things. But it'll be really interesting to see this game a year, 2 years, 3 years after launch, where the world's evolved, kingdoms have changed, there's been a rise and fall of things, and you can look back at systems like these as, where it all started. It was that little trade embargo that started on one city, and it just creates like a history, which I think is pretty unique about this game. It's not necessarily about the progression you're getting from, hey, I got this skill up, I accomplished this with my character. You're actually participating in something of historical value for the game. Like, hey, I was there for that. I was one of the traders that, yeah, it cut into my profits. I wasn't trading to this city, but we helped take down this. And, it's just really interesting. So, just something I think is worth diving into. You're muted, Diggs.
Back in my day, we didn't have the stables in Fall Creek.
Yep, exactly. So, but anyways, yeah, that was Developer Blog 57, the day in the life of politician. Oh, go ahead.
One thing I just wanted to delve in that was kind of interesting in the mechanics is that there are neighborhood politics and then citywide politics, and we can, I suppose, expect that could expand out to larger county or kingdom once we get those several cities and actually try and forge a nation. But that the neighborhood politics will be a little bit different than the city politics is kind of interesting too.
I just got slightly distracted. I saw the Figment posted some off-topic. Amba would love to talk with you about the mechanics you would imagine for the sword I finally just finished. So resume your regularly scheduled conversation. One really cool thing about the show for you guys tuning in, the developers are in here answering questions and talking about things, getting feedback from players on pretty cool little stuff. So definitely tune in live if you can, if you're watching this on YouTube. But we'll push on into the next blog, which is the next one is stable, which it kind of tied into the first one, which the trader was dealing with. The main issue was he had a horse, and he was trying to stable it somewhere, and he had issues, and he was using the caravan one, which has to do with trade. But anyhow, it was all held to do with the mount was what originally started it. So makes perfect sense. The very next blog is about stables and mounts. So
the issue was that it was too expensive for Jerem to stable his house kind of in the city at the caravan house, and if he built a house where he was and used taxes to support that would spread that out among the populace. And so he would still have to pay a certain amount, but it would be significantly less since part of the funding for that was shared across the town. And then that probably moves us into the next blog about the details of stabling.
What I got from that was essentially, the caravan house rates for their daily rate was really high, and the movement he wanted to make, because I believe his house had no way to upgrade a stable area, so he couldn't personally do it, and the only other way was having a public stables, which I would imagine is free for anyone in that community as long as there's room. And everybody in the community, it raises, adds some small amount to their property taxes, but they have access to this public stable that they can use for free, is kind of the impression I got. But you're right.
And I guess the pamphleteering, he had to send out pamphlets to try and convince people, you want to have a stable too.
Yeah.
Right.
So
it's too expensive.
It's pretty interesting that well, let me see here how I want to start this out. So, obviously that leads us right into the next blog. But the next blog, there's a reason that it's worth doing an entire blog about this, first of all. I mean, obviously the developers did it, so obviously there's a reason to. But stables and mounts, when you think about other MMORPGs, we think of mounts. You think of World of Warcraft. Oh, it's this aesthetic thing. It helps me get around the world. and it's cool, and it's a way for character expression and stuff like that. But in Revival, totally different. I think, I don't know if you guys agree at all, but um, the way the world sounds, how it's shaping up to be, extremely dangerous, and actually having to physically transport goods for trade, those type of things, you know, create a lot of other purposes for mounts other than just like, hey, this is convenient, it's gonna get me somewhere faster. It actually will have a huge impact on, you know, how much profit you can make, if you can quickly traverse goods back and forth. Your safety between locations, if you're traveling, lots of different things, and obviously too, sticking with the theme of Revival being a, true to life medieval world, albeit with the horror, dark fantasy, and some magic and stuff there, but having to deal with these, regular life issues of how do I get from point A to point B, and travel being a huge thing with it, and animal taming, obviously, huge thing in the medieval world. That was super influential to the health of populations. Having transportation for one, but also having livestock to survive off of, which I imagine in Revival will also play a role, taming creatures and profiting off of production you can get from livestock. So yeah, but go ahead. Any what did you get? What stood out to you guys about this particular blog? What were you expecting for mounts? What did you see in it? What are you hoping for? Any thoughts at all? Just throw them out.
You want to go ahead, Diggs?
Well, yeah, I'll say that it's kind of interesting when I think about the differences between the two main characters that I have in mind. My original is kind of a city dweller, and it's going to be primarily stuck in Crown's Rock. If he's going to travel, it's going to be through planeswalking. My other character, if I go that route and create a Garavi character, then she might very well have a mount. She's more of a nomad and would be probably traveling from spot to spot, but just getting around. She'll be likely out in the wilderness and not really a city person at all in any sense. So a mount might be more important. So those are kind of opposite ends of what I'm thinking of in terms of characters. The coolest thing that I read in that blog, though, that I want more information about is that there's horses, oxen, and they said Equidae,
Oh yeah, Camelot and
or
the
Bovidae,
Yep.
which is pigs, boars, right?
It's I think it's a little bit bigger than that. I think it covers like goats, oxen, like all types of livestock type animals. So.
'Cause I don't think of riding on goats and pigs.
Yeah, I
or
would.
really even oxen.
I would
So-
imagine if you have it as like a pack animal, that there will be ways that you could use it as a poor version of a mount, that would serve you in such a way, maybe to carry extra goods and yourself save energy, but it doesn't actually speed up your travel time as if you would just walk. So I don't know. We'll have to see what they say. Maybe they'll comment in the chat on that. But yeah, that's a great point. Keep going. I'm sorry, I totally cut you off there.
No, that was it. For starters, I mean, I guess those are we might, if we think of them as pack animals, they might be something we would want to stable. But I'm just trying to wrap my head around having a bovine, what I think of as a bovine, large enough and kind of docile enough that I would want to try to ride that. We'll see.
Yeah, I figured the Bovidae family was cows and oxen, and normally when you think about history, they're led by a tether or something, but I've certainly seen historical pictures of them being ridden. So I figured, okay, well that works. I think the most important thing that jumped out at me about this blog was the third option to store a mount using standing points. That's news. So I'm curious about all kinds of things that have to do with this method of spending standing points. Just like with blessings and all that whole conversation, here's another way to spend standing points. And the way that Kedron says it is just like with dry docking a boat, this will put your mount in a storage location where it will be safe until you need it again. That kind of sounds like the typical MMO thing where I don't need my horse anymore, so I just pack it into my bag. Yeah. I'm guessing there's something else that happens because this is Revival.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's more along the lines, because from what I get in general of the monetization model is that, Revival is a brutal world, and obviously I'm sure the developers know that the majority of players out there, prospective players out there, are used to, safe Candyland MMOs where, people don't have to worry about anything. So, they want to stick true to their brutal environment, but allowing people to have the opportunity to actually do a few things safely, or, at least free from severe consequence. I would say, like, you're able to, like the standing point option of, hey, I'm going to insure my items. So yeah, if I get, looted by bandits in travel and routes to somewhere else, I'll lose those items, but I'll be recompensated. So it feels a bit better. It doesn't feel quite as harsh, and I think that can make a good model. I don't feel like it. The way that they've described it thus far, it doesn't feel like it can be abused for pay to win. Nearly as badly as other. I can think of several other systems from other games of monetization that were just very poorly done. But it seems like it's a way to kind of offer some of those things. And when I envision specifically in this instance, we're talking about with dry docking or taking your mount and totally stabling them in a safe way where they can't be stolen from the local public stable where they're physically in a stall, and somebody could come and steal from them if they're able to get away with it. I feel like it's a way that not necessarily you can tuck it into your bag and pull it out anywhere, but actually you'll be able to keep it free from, not able to be stolen by other players, or perhaps maybe they're gonna, make it to where you are reimbursed if it is stolen, standing points to do that type of thing, which, that's what I would imagine from the other standing point, when they've expounded on different elements of the monetization system, that's what I've seen. So I would imagine that stabling and getting this type of safe put away has something to do with that, where you're not necessarily free from harm, but you'll be reimbursed for your loss because you've elected to use some of your standing points, whether you paid for those or whether you actually used what you've earned, from actually participating in the game world to do that.
Well, I have to jump in, and again, I mean, I don't know how people use this word safe. People in talking in the forums don't seem to use safe in the way that we use safe in real life. Like, if you have stables, you have guards, it's probably fairly safe. Much safer than just leaving it out tethered somewhere or not tethered. Especially if it's in a town. I mean, it might wander off, I suppose, if it's not tethered. But if you have it in the stable and the stables are guarded and the area that the stables are in have guards, it's pretty safe. One of the cool things that I saw in there, though, was no flying mounts. We had that. We had like a week or 2 weeks of please, let's have dragons. We should be able to ride dragons, and there's a hint that there might be some supernatural types of things you could ride. I'm thinking as in stuff from other planes, and I don't know that that's necessarily anything flying. I'm just saying there could be potential of other stuff we don't normally see in the Prime plane, as stuff you might try to ride. But again, this is horror, and you know, if there's something like a dragon, it's going to eat you or kill you or enslave you. You're not going to just jump on a dragon and be its friend. And I think that's pretty much the same for any other kind of otherworldly animal we might encounter or being we might encounter. I don't think we're going to be trying to hop on the backs of most stuff we encounter that aren't horses or cows or mules or whatever.
Yeah, to jump in on that too, I think just to help everybody's perspective out a little bit too, flying mounts cause a lot of problems with world design. If you have the ability to fly, first of all, if you think, let's look at the industry juggernaut really in World of Warcraft. Originally started out no flying mounts. You had some fast travel type flying, the Griffin Riders, you'd ride them. But they were set, they had set pathing. They would take you between two certain points, and, it didn't cause any immersion breaking stuff. Whereas, when World of Warcraft moved to like free form flying anywhere, you could have a flying mount and go anywhere. All of a sudden you have people flying to where like edges of the map would be, and you really have to do things to like hide the fact or create a reason why people can't go over here, and there's things about that are very immersion breaking, which I think, Revival, one of the things they're trying to do is keep the immersion as authentic as possible. So, all the game lore aside, just, flying mounts create issues with immersion in that sense from a development perspective. So, you have invisible walls you're going to have, or fatigue, people flying over the ocean and just drowning. There's a lot of things, especially if Revival is starting out as a world that, the whole world isn't maybe built yet. We're starting out with just Crown's Rock and a few surrounding areas. They're going to have to do things to keep, kind of keep us from going off way too crazy. Obviously, for places they haven't built, maybe there will be, I hope they come up with clever ways for artificial barriers instead of just having invisible walls anywhere. But, we'll see when that time comes. But yeah, anyways, the whole point, flying mounts can be kind of devastating to immersion and not really helpful to what you're trying to do, especially if your world isn't built with verticality in mind. I don't know if either of you guys have heard or seen or played Firefall. That game was built expressly with the idea that people are going to be very vertical in the game, going on top of mountains and things like that. And even they have been like super slow in their inclusion of flying mount type systems where, you would have gliders with propulsion. You could glide down from high areas, but you didn't really have ways to get up besides like jump jetting, hopscotching and stuff. So, there's other things to consider than just, it doesn't fit in the lore, or, we just don't want players to have it. There are a lot of reasons for that, so I was just throwing some of those out there for people who may not, be thinking about these things. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead and continue discussion. What did you think? What are your thoughts about mounts in general, Polaris? What do you think about flying mounts in other games? What do you think about it?
I'm pretty much like 99% on board with what you expressed in terms of thinking that they make the world smaller, and that's a problem. I've seen dev commentary on other games where they introduced flying mounts and kind of went, oh crap, because it allowed players to gobble up the content even faster than they already did. It got people off the ground where they had to actually deal with mobs on the ground, situations on the ground, and it was enabled them to just escape. And so in that sense, it makes the world too small, too fast, and causes all kinds of problems on the development side of things. And for players, it's really, really convenient and handy, and once you introduce it, you can't take it back. So now, multiple problems. In terms of Revival, this I thought it was interesting because it raised the question about SP again. And that was a kind of a loaded topic before. So I wondered if it would become a loaded topic again, because it's mentioned here. Then I was concerned a little bit about the storage, because he doesn't go into detail about, does that mean, it's kind of folded up and stuck in your pocket, or is it actually at a stable where it's safe, kind of thing. But I think the whole stables and mounts thing pretty much, other than that, fits what I expected. I did expect mounts to be expensive. However, I kind of got from the blog, they may be more expensive than I thought they would be. So, one more challenge in terms of ways to raise money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the price of mounts, the fact that they specifically mentioned it, and the fact that, they are going to be expensive, it's a way to create decision-making opportunities for players. If everybody can afford a mount, that's not a choice. You just buy one. If you can't afford a mount, now you have to consider, what do I have to sacrifice to get a mount? Do I have to,
right,
tailor off my blacksmithing skills or something? I can't afford, crafting agents for that because I need to invest in a mount. So all of a sudden it starts creating possibilities. I think that's one of the major downfalls to a lot of other MMORPGs. There's no exclusivity to things, in the sense that pretty much any character, if they've achieved the level that the developers have established, like, hey, we shouldn't let them have it until this level. But then after that, pretty much it's like a given. You get to that level, you get a mount, or you get to that, and it's just assigned to you, and all of a sudden it's this other bolt-on game element, and it's not actually a separate decision-making avenue, which I think, makes Revival kind of unique in that aspect. You're not going to just achieve something and then be like, oh, you've gotten your skill to this and something now, here you go, every character who's done this has done this. But, tying things specifically to skills obviously helps with that, and not having leveling in general, that automatically helps with a ton of issues. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, having the game set up in such a way actually presents new areas for people to explore, new choices to make, simply by just, making something cost a lot more than, people can afford. Most people.
Well, it's a very different paradigm all the way around, and there's a synergy or of interplay there, in that it's not just about the price of the mount. I mean, this is a world more so than it is a game, and in a game, like you say, this is just a reward for hitting a level, basically. In a world, like I said, my main character isn't going to be leaving the city much. So what's the point of spending money on a mount, not just to purchase the mount, but to maintain the mount, if I'm not leaving the city very often? It's not worth it to have a mount just to get around Crown's Rock, most likely. There's very many different aspects of the game that make it so that everyone won't even want a mount.
Well, and I think the chat is also brought up another point that I hadn't even gone there yet, in terms of the mortality of your expensive mount. So not only, let's say it costs 20 gold sovereigns, let's say in Crown's Rock, which some people might consider pretty expensive, but then that thing can die, and you can't you can't like auto-res it or something. I mean, that's quite the drain on your purse, to be spending 20 sovereigns on a mount every week or two because you were a noob with the way that you had your horse out in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It presents some, obviously, and it's kind of a teaser here into our post-intermission, the part 2 of this show, some stuff we're going to be talking about, but all these agencies and freedoms we've been talking about, really cool, unique things that Revival is doing and providing for players, they all come with some, there are some negatives to them and some consequences. And these are things that are going to have to be accounted for, both on the development side and the player side, obviously. So, it'll be interesting to discuss those, which we will be doing actually very shortly. But if you guys, I want to pass back to both of you guys. Do you have any more thoughts on mounts before we break into a quick intermission?
I just wanted to mention, Omba mentions in Skype that they have to bring hooved stock from across the sound. And I hadn't even thought about that aspect of it. And another reason why it might be expensive, because they aren't necessarily being bred on the island. Crowns Rock is an island, so how we're even getting animals over there is another question that the characters will have to consider.
Oh yeah, definitely. I didn't even consider that, physical goods of mounts being brought from a separate location. That is a pretty huge point.
Yeah, there's just a lot to think about. I mean, it really kind of extrapolates out there on ping, ping, ping.
Yeah, it's interesting the amount of depth that, obviously all these different systems interacting, it can go pretty far back, a chain reaction, to almost, in some considerations, it might be impossible to see the full chain reaction of events that can happen from one small thing, which I think is pretty awesome, but also kind of scary. If I was a developer, I'd be a bit scared about that, and I imagine that the developers are wary of, the kind of chaos they might be building, but hopefully they've got a good plan in place. So far, it seems like they do, and it sounds like they've done quite a bit of work on information tracking. So hopefully they'll be able to catch, a bad cycle or something that's going to have very big negative impact, and be able to catch it with a storytelling team or with some type of automated system for like the free-to-play servers. So, but anyways, yeah, great points, great thoughts, both of you guys. We're gonna do a couple minutes intermission, just to real quick give you guys a chance to go up and go to the bathroom, and that way I can cut this for YouTube so it fits nicely. So yeah, we'll be right back in a couple minutes to talk about more stuff, namely positives and negatives to agency and things like that. So yeah, stay tuned. We'll be right back.